very long time ago, in a kingdom across the sea, a vain and controlling queen lay on her deathbed. Her dying wish, or rather command, was that her husband never marry again unless he could find a woman who was more beautiful than she. Knowing that she was the fairest queen and woman in all the land, she thought that she could keep her husband all to herself even after she died. Well, the king decided to grant his wife's dying wish. So after she was in the grave, he started his search. He sent his men far and wide across the kingdom, looking for a woman who could rival his late wife's beauty, and they found none. Until one day, the king was walking through the halls of his own castle, and he saw her, a woman with the same flaxen hair, the same high cheekbones, the same round green eyes. He resolved on the spot that this was the woman that he would marry. The only problem was that it was his daughter. Now, some of the people in the kingdom said that he must have gone mad with grief. Not enough of the people in the kingdom said that what he was doing was wrong, and so he proceeded. He told the girl of his plans, and having little power herself, all she could do was ask for a few pre-nuptial gifts. She said that she wanted 2 rings, a nutshell, and a coat made of every kind of animal in the kingdom. And this was a big task, but the king thought he was up to it. And so he sent his men far and wide across the kingdom to slaughter every kind of animal that lived within his realm. And as the months went by, slowly they brought home the pelts. And before long, they had created a long and heavy coat made of 1,000 different animal skins. It was heavy and oppressive to wear, and it didn't smell very good, but he had kept his end of the bargain, and so he told his daughter, "Tomorrow morning, we will get married." He passed over the coat and the 2 rings and the nutshell, not knowing that his daughter, the princess, had a little magic herself. And so that night, she packed up all of her treasures into the nutshell, and she put on the big, heavy coat, and she set out into the night. She walked all night long and collapsed underneath the hollow of a tree. The next morning, she woke to the sound of hunting dogs barking and sniffing close to the tree. And then she heard men. "I think we found a big one, boys." Oh no, were they talking about her? The dogs got closer and closer to the hollow of the tree. And then she shouted, "It's me! I'm a girl, I'm not an animal." She came out of the hollow. "You don't look like a girl." Her hair was matted, her face was covered in dirt, and she was clothed in this huge, hideous coat. "Well, maybe we can take you back to the palace. Maybe we can have you work for the king?" "Oh, no, not the king." And then, horse steps, hoofbeats, coming closer. She looked up. Oh. And somehow, over the course of the night, she had crossed into the neighboring kingdom. This was not her father, but a new and different king. He looked her up and down and said, "What's your name?" She said, "I have no name." "Well, who are your parents?" he asked. "I have no parents," she said. "Well then, we'll call you Allerleirauh for your coat. It means coat of 1,000 furs. And perhaps you can come back to my home and we can put you to work in the kitchen." So she nodded her head and left with the hunting group back to the castle. She was put to work in the kitchen. By day, she made the bread, but by night, she had a little room in the basement that had a small sliver of a window right up by the ceiling from which she could see the light. And in the evenings, after she was done making her bread, she would take off her coat in the safety of this room, and she would begin to weave, because she'd packed up a spinning wheel in that nutshell of hers, and she would use her magic to pluck the little tiny bits of sunlight that came through that window, and she would use them for thread. And over the months, she began to weave herself a beautiful gown, a dress that shone like the sun, the evening sun as it set, and it shimmered in pinks and oranges and gold. And then, one night, after her dress was complete, she learned that the king was throwing a ball. a ball to find his wife. And so she worked hard in the kitchen, sweating, covered in soot and grime, and wearing her heavy coat. She did her work as fast and effectively as she could, so that she could ask the head cook if she could slip away for just 30 minutes to go and look at the ball. She wanted to see the people dancing. She wanted to listen to the music. And the cook, being a grumpy old man, could not protest because she had worked long and hard, and so he said, 30 minutes and that's it, then you better be back down here. So she snuck away to her basement room, and she took off her big, heavy coat, and she washed her face, and she put on the gown that she sewed, the gown that shone like the evening sun. And she went upstairs. She was radiant. She was so different, nobody there recognized her, not even the king. And so he asked her for a dance, and they danced, and they talked, and she was so at ease and so herself. But then 30 minutes came, and she had to dismiss herself. And so she excused herself from the king's presence, flew down the stairs, put the big coat back on, grimed up her face and her hair, and went back into the kitchen. Well, the cook wanted to go see what was going on upstairs too, and so he said, all right, Allerleirauh, it's your turn. You make the soup. The soup? The soup was the king's favorite dish. She had it every night before bed, and while she was good at making bread, she'd never made the soup. So she got to work, and she decided to drop one of her magical rings into the bottom of the king's bowl, just in case the recipe didn't turn out as well as she hoped. The soup was delivered to the king after the ball had concluded, and before long, he called for the cook to come up to his bedchambers. The cook was nervous. Did you drop a hair in the king's soup, hairy one? You're no good except for to have boots chucked at your head. And then he huffed and puffed and walked upstairs, expecting to be punished for a poor soup. The king said, did you make this soup? And the cook said, no, it wasn't me. It was that girl you brought home, Allerleirauh. And the king said, really? This is the best bread soup I've ever had. Go get her, bring her up here. And so up the stairs trudged Allerleirauh in her big, smelly coat. She came up to the chamber of the king, and he said, is it true? Did you make this soup? She said, I did. And he said, what can you tell me about this? He picked a dripping ring up out of the bowl. She said, I know nothing of that ring. That doesn't belong to me. And he said, well, thank you for the soup. I hope you'll make this again. She left, down the stairs into her basement room, where now that her dress that shone like the sun was completed, she started spinning with moonbeams. She waited until the moon was full, and then she threaded ever so gently those beautiful silver particles of light into her spinning wheel and through her loom. And before long, she'd created a dress that matched the splendor of the first. After her dress that shone like the moon was finished, she heard that the king was throwing a second ball. And you know what happened. She worked hard and fast to get all of the bread made for the banquet, and then she snuck away just for 30 minutes, but before she went upstairs, she took off that big, heavy, smelly coat, washed her face and washed her hands, and washed her hair and put on the dress that shone like the moon. And just like before, she was a new creature. She stood tall. She radiated goodness and love and peace. And when she came into the ball, the king was as taken as he was the first time and asked her to dance. But she snuck away after only 30 minutes to go back down into the kitchen and into the cellar to work. And the cook was as cross as before and as overwhelmed as before with all of the work that needed to be done. And so he said, Allerleirauh, tonight you make the soup. She said, okay. And as soon as the cook was gone, she dropped her magical nutshell into the bottom of the bowl and then poured the soup on top. Just like before, the king knew that the cook had not made his soup, and so he summoned Allerleirauh. Allerleirauh, did you make this soup? Yes, sir, I did. And what can you tell me about the nutshell that I found at the bottom of my bowl? I know nothing of that nutshell. Well, thank you, he said, quite puzzled. I hope you'll make this soup again. And so down the stairs she went. And now that her dress that shone like the moon was completed, she had one more task in front of her. This time she had to wait until the moon disappeared, until it was completely obscured. And when it was gone, the stars began to shine at their fullest. And so she could pick the little threads of starlight that came through the window, and she could weave them and spin them and turn them into her most brilliant creation yet, a dress that shone like all of the stars in the sky. And when the dress was finished, she heard that there was to be a ball. And so she asked for just 30 minutes away from the kitchen and the grime. And she cleaned her hair and she cleaned her face. And she put on the dress that shone like all of the stars in the sky. And she went upstairs. But this time the king was ready for her, and he asked the musicians to play the very longest song that they knew. And as they danced, the king slipped a ring onto her finger, that magical ring. The magic sometimes worked in ways that Allerleirauh knew about and could prepare for, but sometimes it worked for her. And so she didn't notice that the ring was slipped onto her finger. She realized that she'd been too long, that the song exceeded 30 minutes, and so in a flurry she just missed herself and ran down the stairs, but she didn't have time to clean her hair or to undo the cleaning of her hair. She didn't have time to put the ash back on her face, and so she put the coat on in a hurry, and she didn't fasten it, and she made the soup like she did before, and then before you knew it, the king summoned her up to his bedroom, to ask about the soup. And he said, "Allerleirauh, did you make this soup?" She said, "Yes, I did." And he said, "What can you tell me about the ring I found at the bottom of the soup?" Because this time she had dropped the other ring into the bowl. And she couldn't speak. She just hung her head paralyzed. And that's when the king saw it. He saw a golden ring on her finger, and he saw that she hadn't fastened her coat and that it hung slightly open, and that there was light, radiant light pouring out from behind the coat. So he got up from behind the table and gently approached her, and he put his hands on the coat, and with such sincerity and tenderness, took it off of her and dropped it onto the floor. And as he did, there she was, in all of her splendor and goodness and wholeness and beauty. He picked up that dripping ring out of the bottom of the bowl, and he said, "I hope you don't mind if I wear this one." And he said, "What should I call you, my love? You can't be known anymore as Allerleirauh." And she said, "Why don't you call me Eleanor? Because Eleanor means light." Thank you.